Happy Thursday, everybody, or for most people. Hope you're having a great day. It's almost the weekend, and fall is very much in the air, at least on my side of the world. It is.
Does it,
We
it
actually even got a
is
spring.
it even
We
possible? Do you have fall?
we it's you know I have a red oak, big red oak right outside of my house that actually gets fall leaves. So I get rankled a bit when everyone's like, oh, the West Coast doesn't have fall or the fall leaves. I need to go to the East Coast, like or east side or the east side of the country. And I can positively tell you there get to be brown, beautiful leaves and reds and the oranges, and they're right in front of my house. So take that, Gregory and other side of the country people.
Well, I'm not. I live in the Berkshires of so I've got a full-on New England uh, peak landscape out my window. So you
Nice.
can take your red oak, and I'll raise you
A bunch of
a
maple
whole
trees.
forest.
Yeah, totally.
um, okay, I did it.
How you doing, Sarah? How are you this morning? Are you good?
Got coffee, which is step number one. And my valley has its fall. So there's so much fog in the valley, I can't see anything, like at all. It's all white. So it's been cool as it's getting cooler here in Southern California in the mountains. We're getting much, much thicker fogs in the morning, and they're lasting like way longer into the day, which is great because it means the moisture is coming. So
Yeah,
yes, there is
no
fall,
doubt.
Gregory, in California. It just expresses itself quite differently than in New England.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, I'm good. Can
cool.
you
It's
guys
good to
hear? Can you guys hear the vacuuming in the background, or am I coming through?
light. It's lightly. It's not.
Okay,
Not bothering
I'll
me.
make sure to mute when I'm not talking. Um, awesome. Well, go ahead, Sarah B. You were just about to jump in before I asked about my vacuum back place.
Yeah, very important community news, your vacuum. Yeah, so I was just gonna casually start maybe getting us started here. I was just looking at who's out in the audience this morning. And I'm noticing that we have Sari, our community manager, out there. So I think we didn't really talk to you about this ahead of time, Sari, but I would love this morning if Sari tells us a little bit about the new guides that are coming out in the world of regen, because she's been authoring a million guides, and there's some really cool stuff in there folks should know about. And then I'm also kind of noticing that Jan is in the audience here, Dave. So it might be cool at some point today to pull Jan up and let Jan talk a little bit about Jan's workshop at Cosmoverse. And I'm not sure what else we had on the agenda this morning, Dave. Is there more
I,
more
I
items
see
you
so
wanted to share?
much. Yeah, I see so much. So I'll share a little bit. I'd love to. Um, so I think we're going to get a special guest appearance from Martin from Open Earth Foundation, and I think he and I will have a little bit of a conversation. We've been finalizing a new white paper on nature-based currency systems that we're going to be actually workshopping this weekend with a group. So he was um, kind enough to let me sort of like push him into a little bit of a dynamic review of the questions that we still have open in the conversation. So that'll be our sort of like, you know, Gregory chaos magic for the week. Um, Having an open conversation. And I'd love to actually, the other agenda item that I think would be fantastic if we could cover and sort of like get into the conversation was if Ned could give us a little overview of the experience at GOAT, at the Gathering for Open Agriculture Technology that Regen and many others were attending, working on open source, all sorts of open source ag tech. And that's really in strong partnership with the Open Team community. So if Ned would be willing to do that. I also see a wild Matt Barlin from Block Science here. So there may be some interesting opportunities if we end up getting deep enough in the conversation to be talking about the intersection of nature-based currency design and token economics and engineering token economics. But I think we should probably see how far we get in the conversation since we only have an hour. So that's those are the things that are sort of on my mind and that I've been queuing up for this morning.
Awesome.
So why don't we start with Sari hopping up if she's game and giving us just like a quick several minute rundown of the amazing guides that she and the team have been working on. Then maybe Sarah B, if you want to give a several minute overview of the marketplace launch, and especially it was just like give everybody a blurb about the amazing city forest credits that were just featured in NPR. And it's probably good that we give everybody the news before we jump into the sort of the more fun exploratory section of Regenerati News Hour.
Awesome. Well, I see that Sari came up here on the stage. So, Sarah, you comfortable talking about the guides? And then I'll talk about the marketplace launch because the guides really help to inform the people about how to use the marketplace and the system. So,
Yeah, for sure. I am super stoked to talk about the guides. I've been at R&D for 3 months now. I think I hit Tuesday officially was my 3 months. And kind of the whole time I've been working on this guidebook, which has been amazing because I mean, how often do you like get to start a new job and then kind of write like the how to know the company? What I'm saying is it was an amazing learning experience, like getting to like learn all the ins and outs of how Regen works as a network in a community and how and getting to plug that into Cosmos ecosystem, which I was a little bit more familiar with. So yeah, the guides kind of start big with this is what Cosmos is, this is vocab you need to talk about blockchain, and then it gets into this is what Regen Network is, these are the parts that make our whole, and then it gets into there's a section for wallets, like this is how to set up a Kepler wallet so you can interact with Regen, and then it gets into network governance, like this is how to use Commonwealth, this is why governance is so important to us, and then the final section is all about how to use the marketplace and how to buy and retire and transfer eco credits and how to interact with our basket functionality, which is coming soon as well. And then, yeah, and then, currency guides, like how to acquire the correct currency that you need for the marketplace and what fees mean and how to use exchanges, that sort of thing. So yeah, they're pretty awesome. Definitely very big. I hope nobody reads them all the way through, but hopefully there will be little pieces of information that will be helpful for people starting or continuing their journey with us.
Awesome. Just so people know, I am just going to tweet out the link here at guides.regen.network.
yeah, big thanks to you, Sari, for putting together all these guides, which is really exciting. We've been for a long time wanting to have just better, like general guides to make the network access a lot more accessible for people. And then Sari's been an instrumental part of our kind of communications team around, really making sure that the tools for people to use the marketplace are there. Because some of it's a little bit new to people, and it's going to take a little while for people to get comfortable using all of our user interfaces for the marketplace, which it's supposed to be launching next week, which is quite exciting. So at app.regen.network, we'll make an announcement. There will be the marketplace will go live. So anyone with a Regen wallet can connect. They can explore the different projects with credits that are available. They can buy them, retire them, transfer them, etc. Through the system, which is really quite exciting for us that we're at this juncture. And really, the marketplace is really a user interface that makes the back-end functionality of Regen Ledger, just the core blockchain technology, accessible to every user. So folks don't have to go into the CLI to do the commands anymore. Really, you'll be able to use the live functionality of the blockchain technology, just by connecting your wallet. So it's a whole new level of accessibility to the technology that is coming. And in the launch, we're featuring this really special carbon credit portfolio from the City Forest Credits Registry, which is an independent registry out of Seattle that focuses exclusively on urban forestry in the United States. And they have two types of credits that they primarily develop with municipalities and nonprofits and land trusts across the United States. And those methods are really looking at two urban forestry scenarios. One is there's a forest right on the edge of the city, and the city development, the neighborhoods, they're starting to encroach and they're threatening this piece of existing forest that's right here on the edge of the city. So it's a forest preservation credit style. And then their second credit style is tree planting in the city. So everything from, we're putting restoration native trees on a hillside in a forest inside of a park, or we're putting street trees, across a particular neighborhood, or we're adding, fruit trees and native trees to an existing community garden project in the city. So that second type of credit really focuses on the carbon removal perspective and the expansion of what they in municipal park planning call the shade tree blanket over the city. Because most cities in the United States, whether you realize it or not, many of them have climate action plans. Most of them have some sort of municipal open space management plan for all the green spaces, within a city limit or a municipality limit. So a lot of the work that City Forest has done is really finding these amazing municipalities and land trusts across the United States that are already doing really spectacular urban edge and urban development work insofar as forestry is the application tactic. And we are going to be featuring, throughout the next couple of months, we're going to be slowly rolling out a total of 16 projects from the City Forest Credits portfolio, everywhere from like Ohio to Pennsylvania to Tennessee to Washington State. There's a lot of Austin, Texas, a bunch of different cities and land trusts across the country that really have been, from my perspective, having worked with land trusts, quite brave, moving into the carbon market for the first time. So this is sort of some of America's most innovative municipalities and land trusts stepping into their very first carbon credit production projects, their forestry protection projects. And so we've been, partnering with City Forest Credit Registry and this portfolio of land trusts over the last, really a year almost, really working with them to make sure that we're well representing what their credits are, and that, they understand our technology. And it's been a really cool journey because a lot of these land trusts that are in this portfolio, the pre-purchase we made of their credits has allowed them to speed up land acquisition. So a lot of these organizations are now buying and preserving even more land at a faster rate than they would have been able to without, a carbon credit program to support them like this. So coming soon, next week, hopefully, should be a really exciting moment. And I do recommend taking a look at Sari's guides at guides.regen.network, making sure your Regen wallet address is all set up and you know how to use the Kepler wallet, taking a look at the currencies, figuring out which ones that you want to make sure in your Regen wallet for use to make purchases in the marketplace. So you're all set and ready to go. And this is the first of a number of product launches through the fall. We also have the Regen Ledger Polygon Bridge coming, the NCT Regen Pool and Osmosis. There's sort of a wave that this particular marketplace launch, it starts a bigger wave of activity across our whole ecosystem and a bigger release of a series of tools throughout the fall. So maybe with that, I'll switch back to you, Greg or Dave, if there's anything else you want to add about marketplace launch. I know we're all really excited and just really honored to work with such high quality forestry partners across the United States as we take the first steps here as a community to using the marketplace and buying, selling, and retiring credits for climate change.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of chime in and say I'm super stoked because, I was just chatting with some NFT artists and some other folks who are looking for native Web3 carbon credits. And people were just so excited that these represent local climate action that actually lots of people, if you're living in the United States, you could go and actually start plugging in and having kind of a hometown experience of what it looks like to build more climate resilient cities. And that's just so cool. It's just super cool because so oftentimes it's kind of an abstraction. And it's important that we're doing, forest conservation in the Amazon or the Congo basin. It's important that we're doing broad acre regenerative agriculture. Those are all really important, but there's something really cool about sort of the first suite of credits that are coming into the marketplace, representing something that's so tangible, and that's pretty unique. So I'm excited about it. I think it's going to be, yeah, it's a great place to be starting. So, yeah, I don't know, Dave, do you have anything that you want to add in that around marketplace launch?
No, I mean, obviously our teams have been working hard to get things ready. I just, want to give a big shout out to obviously Sari and Sarah and the Loa team and everyone who's on the interfaces side. I mean, it's really been I think it's going to be a major fulfillment of the white paper, and some of the promises we've made for, years ago. And it's hard to overstate what a big deal this is. And obviously it's going to be just the beginning when it comes to bringing ecological assets to market. But it is, for me, been part of this, for a long time. I couldn't be prouder of everybody's work to pull this together, and knowing we're just getting started. So congratulations, everybody.
Yeah, I'm pretty amped as well. Fantastic. Well, sort of moving along, and I see lots of folks continuing to join, lots of really active folks, both from inside the Regen ecosystem and the broader refi movement. So if people are excited to chime in, please feel free to jam. Martine, I sent you an invite to speak. Twitter Spaces, you need to be on your phone just in case that you're not tuned into that. So if you're on your computer, I think that Twitter's still not supporting computer. There we go. Awesome. Hey, Martine. Good morning.
Good morning. Hi. How's everyone doing?
Thanks for jumping in.
Pleasure to be
Good morning, Martine.
Yay. I've missed everyone.
Yeah, we've missed you. I'm excited that I'll be getting to jam with you starting tomorrow. So for those who haven't been along, some of you have been along on pieces or the whole adventure, but for those of you who haven't, Martine came and engaged with us in our sort of gathering that took place here in the Berkshires a little while ago during New York Climate Week, right in the thick of things. And then we also got to jam together down in Colombia at the greenhouse event. And so really got a significant amount of work done in both of those instances. And now Martine and his team have been working on a white paper. I've been doing a little bit of help as well around nature-based currency systems, specifically. And I'll let you tell more of the story here before we kind of dig in, Martine. But it has long been the aim at Regen Network to be creating the building blocks for nature-based currencies. And so that's the design of eco credits, the design of the registry governance system, the design of Regen Network as a whole is aimed as sort of a foundational pillar for nature-based currencies, to have there be community ownership, transparency, and scientific rigor behind the type of ecological assets that then can be the foundation for nature-based currencies. So I couldn't be more excited about the fact that there's sort of some rigorous and serious approaches emerging around nature-based currencies, especially, of course, after Kim Stanley Robinson's Ministry for the Future, in which he wrote sort of a positive science fiction account of a transformation of our monetary system that leads to us addressing climate change. And that's nature-based currencies in a nutshell. So Martine, you want to just give everybody a little bit of a overview of where things are at? And then I was thinking we could actually kind of dig into some of the open questions together, and yeah, just kind of have a dialogue, have a conversation, and hopefully be generative in the conversation, not just sort of a presentation, but actually with the community exploring some of the living edges where there's still thought and exploration that needs to go into solidifying the vision.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, this is a huge and exciting topic. And as you know, Gregory, you said, "Hey, can you join Twitter Spaces?" And I was like, I woke up really early because I'm having a really hard time with this paper. There's so much stuff on it. You got central banks and refi and just like how to design a new monetary system. And I just
I
needed
was like,
a
come on, Martine, just build in public. Just build in public.
That's right. And I even sent you a version when I was like, please don't open it. Let me send you a polished version. Um, so
Thanks for
I'm
pushing the
literally,
edge. I really appreciate your courage to just sort of like jump in and hash things through, think out loud. Just encourage everybody really to be thinking out loud in these
yeah.
moments, because I think everybody benefits, and hopefully you and I and others will as well. Who knows who might sort of chime in and point us to a resource or offer a suggestion that kind of crystallizes things. So
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing for me is that this sort of has emerged or at least accelerated because of thinking out loud and bouncing this idea. Um, so at least the context of where we're at now is yeah, really in the thick of trying to have a first internal draft of a white paper. Um, it's not designed to be like, here's how nature-based currencies here's how a nature-based currency should work, or a nature-based central bank digital currency particularly should work. More like how to address this topic. What are the things that are relevant to consider? What are potential approaches? What are potential architectures that we can explore? At the essence, of course, it's bringing nature, the value of nature, natural capital, into our monetary system. Because
natural
we
capital or living capital?
Well, after your contribution, definitely living capital, but um, also we have and that's part of what I've struggled with the paper is the audience, right? Um, do do we speak to more traditional economists, less traditional economists, central bankers, um, and so trying to explain first natural capital and then say, well, the thing about how we've tackled natural capital so far is still in our colleague John Clippinger's framing a Newtonian approach because we break things into parts. Here's the forest, and here's how much forest there are. Here's the soil, and here's how much soil, and here's how much water there is, and that's just not necessarily how nature works because all of these are the interrelationships of them is part of what is powerful, and that's where your notion of living capital and the fact that it's metabolizing what we really want to preserve. Um, so yeah, and the in and that sort of alludes to like how to write something and propose a project like this, considering the different audiences, right? But I was also saying that this kind of evolved by thinking out loud because, and it's been a huge surprise to me, the appetite there is for these wild ideas that could potentially be seen as science fiction elsewhere, but now are taking so much traction. So last year we started doing a lot of research on different avenues for artificial intelligence to represent living systems. And that took us down the wormhole path of active inference, and what we've learned through theoretical neurobiology of how the brain works, and essentially how the brain creates a simulation of its environment and is constantly testing predictive models, and that is a potentially feasible way to represent AI in living systems. And then that connected with things like the KlimaDAO of the mechanics of having assets in a digital treasury and creating a token that's let's say a derivative of that. And so putting two together, the thought of like, well, I think Web3 and refi has all the mechanisms to be able to do that, and Regen has the robust processes and governance to really bring robust ecological assets into such treasuries. However, the monetary system that we have today is not backed by a treasury. It's very much backed by policy and faith to some extent. So
it's partially treasury backed, right? So it's sort of a hybrid. Because there are like right, as I understand it, there are elements of and rules around how much sort of collateral or treasury backing different sectors of banking need. Yeah. And then there's sort of the trust and faith policy, fiat, and monopoly on violence that back the rest of the system. But there is also still at the core, even there's sort of like treasury reserves, and then you have to upgrade policy in order to, be able to issue more without having more reserves, right?
Yeah,
in terms of
absolutely.
how monetary system works.
And treasuries are still relevant, and collaterals are relevant in banking. I guess I was alluding to the big transition at Bretton Woods, which is actually where we met, you and I, Gregory, back in the day at Bretton Woods in the Global Economic Visioning Retreat, where the US dollar went from being backed by gold to being backed essentially by monetary policy. And the reserves in the Fed are...
Just to clarify, we didn't actually meet at the original Bretton Woods conference in which the U.S. went off the gold standard, right?
Back in those days. What was fascinating about this, and this is where it just ties so much into Regen, is that we launched the Ocean program this year. For those that don't know me, I'm the founder and executive director of the Open Earth Foundation. So go to openearth.org and you'll learn a little bit more about what we do in the intersection of emerging tech and open source and planetary scale approaches. And the Ocean program was launched with the incentive to help governments finance marine protected areas, which are extremely hard to finance, very important, particularly as we have goals to conserve 30% of oceans and land. And so we worked on the paper of marine ecosystem credits. We're going to publish it more openly in a month. We're still receiving a lot of really good feedback from peer reviewers, and it's designed to implement, particularly in its first POC that we're also working on it with Regen. And we did this in collaboration with the Costa Rican government, particularly the Cocos Island Marine Park, which is part of the Galapagos Eastern Corridor, Marine Corridor. And we presented this work in Costa Rica just in June, and really thinking out loud, we mentioned them. We're like, well, these credits could be used for, improving your conservation finance. It could be used for scaling your nature for debt swaps. It could be used if you want to sell them, but you could also put them into the balance sheet of your central bank and issue a currency. Sort of wildly saying it in a meeting with the minister, and everyone was like, wait, that's very interesting. and so it has evolved that I've been sort of socializing this with different people in government, not just in Costa Rica. I've now described this to ministers in Ecuador, in Honduras, where Open Earth is a partner of UN climate change, and so I've also pitched this to different folks at the United Nations, and there's a lot of interest. I've also discussed this with reinsurance companies, and now we are actively in dialogue and collaboration with the Costa Rican Central Bank, because they actively have environmental accounts. And if some of you may be aware, the White House, the United States, is working on its environmental accounts. But these environmental accounts are purely Well, they follow a methodology of natural capital, but they are just records. They are not assets. They're not in a balance sheet. They're not in a treasury. So the opportunity is to turn them into assets, um, aka incomes region, uh, and um, and turn that natural capital into financial capital. But also, what has to back this, because backing normally is thought through as collateral, where this has to be based, is not just the distinct assets, is the underlying services that produces the planet as a whole. Incomes, the living capital, right? The fact that being able to represent the role of a marine protected area or a national park in the context of what the service of that bioregion or that specific subset habitat has in the planet as a whole, as a living planet, is one of the things that we're trying to include into this work. So that as we are approaching the designs of nature-based currencies, um, ultimately this has to work ensemble. And this is very similar to carbon offsets. If everyone does their own thing, but there's no coordination, we don't really manage a proper accounting of how these reductions are actually helping move the needle on climate change. Um, you know, let's say fortunes are made in the process, but we didn't solve 1.5. In the case of nature-backed currencies, we could do the same thing, and countries are issuing currency, but we're not really maintaining the livable conditions on the planet. So there's a whole bunch of things that go into this paper, reviewing central bank mechanics, reviewing central bank digital currencies, and how this could play an interesting role within the design and launch for central bank digital currency, CBDCs. The role of refi and Web3 mechanisms, as well as the role of artificial intelligence to represent nested models of living ecological areas. I'll pause there.
Yeah, I want to. There's a lot. There's a couple places that I want to dig into, and I think are going to be really fruitful conversations. I also Tony Lai, who's a fellow co-conspirator, just hopped in. So Tony, I think I sent you an invite if you want to come and jam. I'll sort of reiterate the prompt and the sort of direction of the conversation in a moment. But I just wanted to, for folks who are interested, there's a lot moving, right? We're dealing with a complex, layered system of politics and economics, and at the foundation of all of that, or ecology, right? And how to re-link our economic and political systems to the foundation of a regenerative relationship with ecosystems, with the biosphere. Martine, you mentioned sort of in passing several times there the potential role of artificial intelligence. Maybe I'll try to summarize a bit of what I heard you say and a bit of what I didn't, and then point people, for those of you who are regular listeners to Regenerati News Hour, you've heard Matt Perkowski and John Clippinger and others come on, I think over 2 or 3 episodes now, and have some active conversations explaining the research that's being done in collaboration between Regen Network, Open Earth Foundation, Bioform Labs, MIT Media Lab, and others in active inference modeling, the work of Carl Friston and the application of that into kind of the build out of tools. The specific role, I think different members of that research group see and are excited about different applications of that technology into this stack. I myself am most interested in the ability to have a formal statistical approach to quantifying uncertainty, and like the role that that's going to play in pricing, in making claims and generating assets. I think that sort of maybe a larger view, and what I hear John Clippinger really being excited about, is actually being able to transform pricing itself from simply sort of transcending the supply and demand price structure. And this is kind of a mind-blowing thought. So, so I'll sort of drop it, and I think at some point we'll continue to have conversations about this. But on some level, what John is suggesting is possible with active inference modeling, especially applied to this sort of nature-based currency system, is bringing in a third term to how prices are generated. Currently, we have supply and we have demand. Um, John is suggesting that with active inference modeling, we can actually get a utility value, get a real ecological functional value into sort of a market mechanism, right? Based on sort of a computational generated understanding of the intrinsic value of ecological health, not just how much market demand is there for a specific asset. And that is a really powerful, exciting, and like big research area. And so I think I want to sort of set that aside for a moment, because that's a big sort of transformational paradigm shifting proposition. But then also what you were saying, Martine, is that in some ways the purpose of the paper that you're churning through right now is to sort of just set out the framework of how to even be thinking about this. So one of the basic pillars of how to think about this is how to have responsible or appropriate pricing, right? How to reconnect market mechanisms with the health of living systems in a responsible way, right? Because I think probably everybody is aware that there are sort of some, I guess, fairly large challenges or potential threats if we're simply monetizing ecological health, right? If we're simply collateralizing the existing system with, in quotes, natural capital, I think all of us intuitively understand that the downside of that is that in certain market conditions, you could see things like the Amazonian rainforest being, in quotes, liquidated as collateral in order to, and I just want to be clear, that isn't actually, like, in some ways, the entirety of the paper is written to provide a framework that allows us to acknowledge that there are some really bad ways that this could happen. And then there's sort of, if we thread the needle, there's a way to be rethinking how currency is designed and created and managed, such that that sort of liquidation never happens. In fact, the basic intrinsic value of the entire sort of political economy, as represented by the symbol of a currency, is reinforcing the preservation and regeneration of those assets. And there isn't any kind of legal right or financial right to create that kind of liquidation scenario. And so the way I read the paper is that's sort of like, it's first and foremost an explanation of how that needs to happen and could be possible. Is that kind of an accurate sort of pithy summary?
I'm excited. Yeah, I'm excited that if there's one thing that comes across from this current hodgepodge of ideas, it's that, because it is essential that the purpose at the end is to ensure that we avoid ecological collapse, we ensure the living conditions of the planet, we don't create irreversible tipping points. And at the moment, not only is our economic paradigm and monetary system not helping that, it's going against it. So what are the things that we need to tweak to it? And that's where embedding that as a goal of the system is key. And for countries that have particularly a lot of this brings a lot of the tensions that are so central to climate negotiations, which is the equitable differences between the global north and the global south, and the ability for the global south to have the financial capital to tackle conservation, to tackle climate actions without the need of doing that by borrowing or pleading debt forgiveness from the north. And so because their natural capital is valuable, and particularly because it's threatened, if we think about terms of additionality, it is where it's needed the most. And then the value comes from it being alive. And that's also where active inferencing can play a role. It also can play a role in, let's say, the ecological monetary policy. And how do you design money supply, but also actions that are supported to ensure that remains the case. So absolutely, I think that what you described, Gregory, is the key, and also a way through the digital linkage of let's say the physical state of the ecological health with an instrument, and this applies not just for like a nature-based currency, but even just a credit, that if the underlying asset, whether it's a forest, loses health, then the instrument needs to follow suit to some extent.
Right.
So
and there's a whole. This is a whole conversation. I actually think that this would be a fantastic forum to talk about the different suggestions about how the linkage between eco credit, because this is the linkage between eco credits and a currency system, right? Where you have a basic unit that represents soil health or above ground biomass or biodiversity, or an index, a holistic index of landscape regeneration or whatever it is. How do we create a dynamic relationship between either the value or the supply of a currency? So I want to dig into that a little bit and have you explain a couple of the different ways that that's being thought about, and also before we do that, I want to welcome Tony up onto the stage. And good morning.
Good morning, Greg. Martine, it's wonderful to hear your voices, and thank you for having me up here. So yeah, just a brief intro. This is the first time I've been on this news hour, but it's wonderful that you've been going over these topics. My name is Tony Lai. I'm a researcher running a blockchain research lab at Stanford, focused on computational law for global public goods, and have had the chance to invite Martine and Gregory along to some of our gatherings, both at Stanford and around the Bay Area. And we've been looking at some of these intersections in order to, I think, create this capability to cooperate and coordinate in ways that we've never been able to before. And that's really the main interest from my perspective, is this idea that we're suddenly coming into, or not suddenly, over the last decade in terms of blockchain, and few decades when it comes to this wider space of computational law, we're coming into this space of being able to set some of these complex shared beliefs into transparent, accountable frameworks. And when we're thinking about active inference and this idea of trying to align on these underlying priors so that we're reducing our prediction error, we're actually aligning our models of the world with actually what we're sensing. I think that's the real aim when we're talking about this physical linking. If an underlying biological region loses vitality, then we need to be able to convey that into all the various different instruments of awareness and consciousness that we are collectively signing up to. And it's not just the pollution of the environmental niches, it's also pollution of the informational niches that we're working with here. And I think that's part of the issue with what we're talking about in terms of markets that only speak to supply and demand and do not have some underlying deontic value. They don't have some underlying policy that you're trying to optimize for. And in this case, we're talking about the underlying biodiversity vitality. But Delton Chen and others who we're going to be able to see on Monday, but Delton talks about the idea of the sort of co-benefits. And the way I see this from an underlying alignment perspective is that these were some of those things. Just when I joined, Greg, you were talking about some of the other underlying values and benefits that are necessary to produce the kinds of restoration and ecosystem protection that we're talking about. And these are things that maybe are not specifically quantifiable into sort of carbon drawn down or biodiversity units created, but they're things like education and healthcare and other things that a local community might want to prioritize as these sort of qualitative co-benefits that are necessary for that local community to flourish, and that can be shown to be, in a sense, again, connected to that underlying asset. And so having this qualitative aspect of the effects of that connection, as well as the quantitative benefits of the sort of carbon being drawn down, I think these are some of these, again, these alignments of change that we can start to coordinate around, where smart contracts are essentially acting as this sort of functional node of a wider collective Markov blanket that's helping to embed these complex shared beliefs. Just
whoa,
like any
whoa,
kind
whoa,
of...
whoa, whoa! What's a Markov blanket?
Oh, sorry, my sense, Gregory, was in that you were talking about active inference, that you were already been covering Markov blankets. My apologies for
Well,
jumping straight in there.
I just want to make sure that, I mean, because that's a big, that's a $1 million phrase. So I just want to make sure it gets its due, and maybe we pin it, or maybe just a brief moment of, you know, why is it important? Like, what's a Markov blanket, and why is it important in specifically in relationship to? I think what you're talking about is holistically valuing the living health of the greater than human world, and in bringing it into the symbolic representation that we call money in a responsible way. I think that's a way of saying back to you what you're saying.
Yes,
And there's like politics, law, and then there's AI. And what is the essential and exciting role of a Markov blanket, and why are we trying to throw it over what we're doing here?
So this term is a term of Carl Friston. He's a neuroscientist, highly cited, and who's been also getting a lot of artificial intelligence researchers as well as philosophers excited by his theory of active inference. And the Markov blanket is one of these core concepts within his theory, which essentially speaks to the fact that we, in our sensory perceptions, we're, in a sense, separated from the outside world by our ability to sense what's happening and our ability to act on that outside world. But that fundamental separation is this Markov blanket, and that Markov blanket is made up of, as I was saying, our capacity to sense and our capacity to act. Now, this is there's the additional aspect, which is that via Carl Friston's experiments and others, we're increasingly seeing that the brain acts like a Bayesian inference engine, which is essentially that none of the senses that we bring in are absolutely certain. It's probabilistic, the sensory states, and none of the active states, again, are absolute. They're also probabilistic to some extent. That brings in the world of statistics, but then it also brings in the notion that the model that we have of the world that we create in our minds on the inside is also not an absolute representation of the outside world. It's a probabilistic representation. So that acts in a cycle where senses come in from the outside, that we compare that against our internal model. We use that internal model to decide how to act, so that when we act on the outside world, and then the outside world is something that we then sense again for our sensory state. So it's this 4-part model where it's acting in a cycle, and it's never sort of stable. It's always in this constant flow. That's the essence of that active inference framework. And the Markov blanket is this, again, this exclusionary boundary of sort of sensory states and active states that essentially wrap around any mind or any consciousness, any self-evidencing or self-referencing self. And so Carl Friston talks about it in the context of the individual, and many of his colleagues talk about it in the context of that sort of conscious self and how it decides to see and act on the world. And I think one of the exciting things with taking that and trying to apply it within the context of currency is that we're able to start to try and do that in terms of this collective self. What does it mean to have a collective consciousness? This additional piece, which I just wanted to add in terms of the idea of sort of collective consciousness and whether it's about eco coins. When I mentioned smart contracts as being, in a sense, this functional node that can potentially help us create these shared consciousnesses. I think one of when I start talking about these co-benefits or these social benefits that are qualitatively different than the sort of purely quantitative carbon capture, let's say, that then starts speaking to the ways in which we can decide what need we want to fulfill. So this is, as an individual mind, we're constantly weighing these different needs that our body is telling us via feelings. And this is the work of Mark Soames, who worked with Carl Friston, wrote a book called Hidden Spring. And it's about, his idea around feelings being at the heart of consciousness. And I think this speaks to this idea that not just with sort of currencies, but also with, a notion of the sacredness. And, this starts then going into this idea of sacred economics. How can we re-embed the stories and the honor that is implied within exchange in a lot of the traditional ways of the world, indigenous sort of social ties, not just within themselves as humans, but to the natural world, is tied to this honor and dignity and storytelling as part of the transactional nature of life. When you take a fish, you honor the sort of fish spirits, and you throw some fish back, that sort of process. And I think that honoring and connection is something that we can also bake into and have as these sort of co-benefits, as Dalton Chen talks about. And I think some of that is, again, to use some of the technical terminology of our space, like that's non-fungible kind of value, but that's still, I think, important to creating this sort of shared sense of awareness, because that's really some of the stuff that's going to drive those collective feelings that I think are going to be at the core of collective consciousness and adding things on the.
Beautiful, and that's sort of important framework to include into the design of nature-based currencies and the responsibility in that design. Tony, what a great intervention, and very much looking forward to your organization this weekend. And maybe you picked up that this has accelerated the work on trying to put some ideas together for the nature-based currency initiative we've been doing, and being able to share these thoughts. Just to also add 2 cents on the Marco blanket discussion, the way that I've understood it since my original background is in astrobiology, we often think about life as being autopoietic, autopoiesis. So the body creates its own body. I understand Marco blankets as like the statistical representation of that body, of the system that is self-creating itself. So just to add that term from those that maybe come from a biological world, and it's very important, because if we have an AI system that is representing a forest or representing Earth, then it needs to understand what the body that is representing is, and what's the world that is around it. So very important to be able to think of how AI and computational models can represent nature, but also then how they can play a role within advanced monetary systems.
100%. Autopoiesis is definitely one of my favorite words of all time. Thank you, Martin.
Autopoetic hyperstition, exploring our collective Markov blanket is that's our koan for the day, I guess. So I want to ground. There's a few, I think, big challenges that I want to make sure we're digging into and getting your thinking on. And I think this is a beautiful forum to have these conversations. So number one is, how are we ensuring that I guess, how am I going to phrase this? In what ways is this going to make us more human and not less? And the bundle of questions that I have around that's like the big question. The sub questions are, who is governing and or updating the algorithms and computational approaches to the statistical representation of ecological health? Number one. Number two, who is governing and updating the value system, of the representation of this ecological health into the monetary system. And those are two very tightly coupled systems. If we're thinking of, software as sort of almost a cultural expression, right? That we're writing this code, and then this code is automating certain societal functions, and then we have to update that code together in order to match that automation with the reality that we would like to be living in, or we need to be bringing into existence. So what are our answers to that? How are we grounding that and rooting that into everyday existence? And sort of, I think that's a super important piece of the puzzle. I also think that's really important, probably in the paper, to be very forthright about.
Yeah, and also the discussions that we'll have this weekend. I mean, these are the very important questions around governance. I think a lot of the things that Tony mentioned in terms of the sacredness alludes a little bit to that. And then I'm also of the thinking that if we think about how this will help us be more human, I'm the opinion that the different economic paradigms that we've sort of accelerated over the last 50 years has made us sort of less human in some sense, because even on like how corporate law has changed the way of how people think and competition. So our socio-technical system, to some extent, has become less human because of these ideas that, again, in John's words, are very much borrowing from the Newtonian way of thinking to more of a living way of thinking, which is what makes us human. So we have to bring in the humanity that we are into the economy that we want, so that we could be the humans that we already are, but into the social structure that we want to be. And so I think that's a key part of it, is thinking about how we want to evolve our economic mindset and our monetary mindset. And I was thinking about this a couple of days ago, whether it makes sense to frame it as nature-based currencies or nature-based assets. But people relate to money all the time because it is their vector for getting certain things done, and it's tangible. And in the process, there's always this feedback loop of like how we understand it. So if we are to also inject into the system something that is able to spread out an enhanced vision of the interconnectedness that we have as a planetary civilization, and what better than through the currency vector. But it's definitely not easy, and a lot of the things that you mentioned in terms of how to govern those values, I think those are some of the tricky questions. Perhaps easier are the more mechanical and computational ways of doing it. I think that this perhaps leads to part of the framework of the paper that also you've helped craft, Gregory, which is we do a revision of CBDCs and refi mechanisms, and then talk about 6 components that we need to consider or even directly include when designing nature-based currencies, and that's adopting the UN system of environmental and economic accounts. It's already quite established. It's pretty good. It has a lot of room for improvement, but it's designed to evolve. The role of advanced ecological credits, which is essentially that physical digital dynamic linkage, which is the conversation that we start having, and it's quite important. The role of common pool resource governance and polycentric governance, and the role of local stakeholders that are immediately connected to that asset that is represented. The role of complex adaptive and socio-ecological systems, so local to global, active inferencing, and digital currencies, and then how those 6 points can feed into 3 ways between traditional and non-traditional nature-based currencies. The more traditional approach would be a nature-based central bank digital currency, something that the central bank issues And the less traditional one would be more of a bottom-up refi Web3 native approach. In the middle, you have private banks and corporate collaterals, let's say. So in the governance of your questions, within those three scenarios, and I don't think that there are either or, there probably are going to coexist. Those questions will be relevant and they may be answered in different ways. I think the opportunity within the refi space is to think about ways in which there is a level of collective governance through having Earth as an entity in that governance that may be harder to do within the central bank system. But I might be wrong, and I say this because one of the key opportunities of the projects that we've been discussing is how a bioregional central bank digital currency or linkage could work in the Eastern Tropical Pacific that links Costa Rica, Panama, Colombia, and Ecuador. And those four countries have constitutional laws of the rights of nature, meaning nature has a right. And that is pretty close to bringing Earth into the discussion, Mother Earth into the discussion. So it could be both ways, but I think that would be a pillar that I would definitely ensure that we really consider. Otherwise, it's just humans disintegrating humans, and we're not bringing nature into the seat of that governance.
Right. And just sort of to reveal, I mean, probably most people are well aware of this bias if you're in this Twitter spaces, but to reveal my bias here, I really think none of this works unless we're rooting the system into community governance at a bioregional and watershed scale. And that's a real paradigm shift. And I think in a lot of ways, I think the central banks and the private banking sector and the sort of new crypto banking sector, which are the three levels that I see this all playing out in slightly different ways, I think are all communities that are going to be pretty attracted to the technology and the science, the application of AI, the application of machine learning, remote sensing, advanced statistical methods, blockchain. All of this stuff, I think, is quite exciting and compelling to the communities that are, sort of running the current financial system. I think the harder sell and the bigger ask at this stage of the game, and what gives me the most anxiety, and so how to articulate this and how to really kind of like make it understood how important it is really how we're rooting the process of in essence value creation into the hands of land stewards at an appropriate ecological scale. Because if that's not happening, I think we're going to get into trouble, because really at the end of the day, there's this whole process of, sort of as Tony was speaking to, one of the core elements that needs to happen is the debanalization or the re-inspiriting of currency, like reclaiming that there is actually a sacred nature to how we as a community, as a culture, as humans are representing value. And that's a symbolic representation. It's a cultural representation. We call it economics, but ultimately, there's a human process behind that. If humans if humans who are stewarding landscapes aren't kind of in quotes where the buck stops, I think the legitimacy of the system is going to be ephemeral, right? I don't think it's going to be a durable system if it's not really deeply rooted into local monitoring systems, local participation in the definition of what regeneration is, local creation of and sort of like management of the system. And obviously that kind of needs to compile up, because we are also, there's this like global local dilemma, right? We need the climate change is global. We need some sort of coordination and sort of like shared system. We know what happens if we don't. People just sort of, it's like billiard balls. Somebody's polluting here and it goes downstream there. So there has to be sort of an interconnection and coordination. And at the same time, there needs to be local roots. Regeneration is local, climate change is global. So the real magic trick from my perspective, I fully expect the sort of technocracy to be all in on the inclusion of natural capital assets onto balance sheets. The question is, will it be done in a way that includes living capital, not just natural capital? Will it be done in a way that integrates land stewards and indigenous people and bioregional care into the essence of how it's sort of going, or will it not? And I guess I'm really, I'm quite excited about that specific piece. How are we telling that story, and how are we making it imminently practical and appealing to center the sort of the locus of control at the right scale, at that right bioregional scale? So, yeah, that's that's the crux in some way.
So the question you asked, just to repeat it, Greg, is in what ways is this going to make us more human? And the breakdown of that was, who is governing and or updating the value system? Who is governing and or updating the algorithms? So I think the who there is this complex system, and Martin laid out these 6 components to consider that included both these sort of international accounting systems that are evolving, the idea of creating these credits with these links, the idea of having, Eleanor Ostrom style common pool resource governance, which is emergent and doesn't in some sense require this top-down Leviathan to impose something, but can give agency to the local stakeholders who are immediately connected to the land to figure out what those local value policies are. And you've got some kind of relationship between the two of them as this sort of complex adaptive system of global forms where things are interoperable, and you don't have the billiard ball effect, but you've got this sort of like global account, but you've also got that somehow connected to these local representations of local value based upon their immediate understanding of their needs, based upon the principles of agency and empowerment. And that goes against the sort of colonial imperial impetus of like, here, take this law, take this framework, you'll be better off with it. We're trying to step away from that and sort of like really re-engage. And then so you've got this multiple different angles of what's kind of like going to be affecting that, and we can, I think, look at that as look at these multiple angles as we're designing the system. One of Larry Lessig's sort of famous conceptual ways of looking at this is the idea of the pathetic dot, which is that as individuals or as sort of like agents, we're impacted from 4 angles by law, markets, norms, and architecture. Architecture in this case being sort of code architecture or potentially physical architecture. And so I think in thinking about how do we enable this to make us more human, and we look at these different impacts from the sort of the legal side, and Martin, you touched upon the rights of nature and the constitutional rights of nature clauses. These are the court system, and then you've obviously got the policy and legislation aspect of law. That's where I'm particularly interested in, because I believe that whole system can be much more rapidly updated and also embedded in ways that actually starts to play into some of these this architecture and these norms as well. And so, in a sense, they're all connected. But I think the markets piece is also interesting to give empowerment on a local level to frame what is valuable on that local basis. And so to the extent that there is some version of maybe a locally representative currency that's can be exchanged for the sort of the global version, but the local version maybe has more salience within that locality. If people come into a locality, they know that by maybe exchanging into that local currency, they can get certain discounts for local goods that are ultimately going to be helping out the local economy as part of a local currency flow. But really it's about notionally having a separately protected and governed local value flow system that enables a particular consumer or purchaser to know that by spending in this local currency, they are honoring in this local currency as well. and maybe there is more provenance. There's more, as I said, these discounts could be offered to sort of like recognize that somebody is sort of like operating within this more local exchange flow framework that is, a slightly different set of norms and a slightly different sort of market mechanism that results in, in a sense, optimizing for these alternative value flows, like, education for young girls, or the sort of like the provision of a basic public health infrastructure for that locality. And again, I think this way of connecting these potentially separate but interconnected currency systems at a local and a global level might allow that level of humanity to be really centered by the people who are defining that humanity for themselves as a cultural expression.
Cool. I'm noticing we're definitely past our hour mark. I luckily today have a little bit of extra time, so I've sort of just been letting the conversation flow. There's a couple community members who I think would like to hop up and maybe ask questions or chime in. Tony and Martine, do you guys have a little bit more time to take questions or have a little dialogue before we close out?
Sure.
Cool. Okay, great. Richard, Ed, if you'd like to hop on, thanks for your patience. Feel free to request again. Look forward to hearing some conversations, some conversation starters or addendums to what's being talked about. So we've got 3. I think we'll probably keep it at that. So Richard, would you like to chime in here, share a question or a thought?
Yes, thank you. This has been an extremely deep conversation, so it's a little bit intimidating to jump in, but here goes. I certainly do hope that crypto, as a community globally, is coming from the ground up. And, I think we'll all worry about all of these interrelationship with central banks, etc. It's I've been all my life in the alternate energy, as we used to call it way back when. And at some point, it turned into clean energy or clean tech, as a matter of fact, as well. And what I noticed is that instead of having the objective as replacing pollution, polluting industries with new innovations that take their place and leave those other systems in history, right? As we went past that, what happened is that the industry transformed itself into one that goes around after the polluters to clean them up. So the polluters remain on their pathway, and I do worry about crypto communities supporting a climate paradigm where, and you see this in this net CO2, net zero ideas as well, where while we're making peace with the polluters, we're gonna recognize that fossil is here to stay, and what we should be doing is just trying to fix all the problems that are being created. And in this regard, natural systems are looking like the balance, right? To balance the damage that continues to be done. And so we calculate a equilibrium, which seems, as we say, sustainable, but it doesn't leave humanity in a thriving mode, right? And I see that as a big problem, So, and then there's one other idea. I love the idea about the body, this way that you're. To me, it seemed like consciousness, like a bardo is like who we are in the world, our self-identity and consciousness. I think that it would be interesting to expand that idea to our architecture, how we live in the world, what is our physical footprint in this world, and that comes down to our homes and our communities, right? And it seems to me that the damage being done to nature is by how we live, what we do day by day. And if we're thinking that, we use all of our human resource and so-called whatever wealth is towards sustaining nature, when nature is actually the model of thriving, anti-entropic energy, I think that that's a bit arrogant in some ways. Okay, I know we have to fix a lot of things. Yes, we have to create the consciousness, but I am really thinking that what we need to do as humanity is that nature would thrive, and nature will look after us if we just take our knee off Mother Earth's neck, so that isn't, and so, focusing on how people are doing seems to me to be the ultimate solution, so, but we need to learn from nature. So our architecture should model nature. Of course, that's where I'm involved in as an inventor and innovator. Anyway, those are just a couple inputs that I thought would be useful, hopefully.
Thank you, Richard. I will say one thing about the architecture piece is that there was a wonderful exhibition this past year at the Venice Biennale called How Will We Live Together? And it was very much digging into a lot of these architectural considerations around this notion of not just living together as people in communities and co-living frameworks and various other modalities of living together, but was also considering this conceptual framework of living together in interdependence with the environment and with nature, and people's role within nature, or even seeing nature as people. And then this brings me on to the second point around the arrogance of separating ourselves from nature and looking only at our sort of impacts on nature, in that sense. And I think that that's very much embedded within the legal system and our ways of objectivizing nature as part of the legal system, seeing it just as a resource that we can extract from rather than something that we're in interrelationship with. And I think this speaks to the different aspects of honor and story and, re-embedding sacredness into our economics that can come from, in some sense, the recognition of the value systems that we want to embed more broadly. And again, the legal system is one of those mechanisms that's currently quite institutionally sort of like extensive across the entire world. As a result of our history of imperialism and colonialism, the British Empire has some debt to bear. The monarchy has some debt to bear in relation to that history and the extant debts that are being imposed on nations around the world. Madagascar, Haiti, they're holding the debts of these imperial adventures still on the generations today. And David Graeber, in his 5,000 Years of Debt, talks very eloquently about this systemic legal regime that we've established around the world that's embedded itself into our financial and institutional infrastructure. And so where you have sovereign nations seeking to embed the rights of nature into their constitutions and are, having Supreme Court cases like in Ecuador with the Los Cedros National Reserve in December, actually enforcing that and actually, writing the precedent. You've got this example of local value systems seeking to push back an exclosure, not an enclosure of territorializing, extraction, but an exclosure of protective safety, that you're trying to create a different value system within that you can nurture and honor. Like that process of creating an exclosure is, I think, part of this legal challenge that we're looking at going forwards to sort of really enable these alternative value flows and alternative recognition within human nature to be developed. And I think that both, eco credits as well as the full range of blockchain-based ledgers that tie in deeply with ritual-based, sort of somatic-based, sort of resonance and societally determined, people-based collective value creation, and that involves deliberation and that involves all of the messiness of what you see in corporate engaging on that human-to-human level interaction. Like that's the level at which we can then start to rebuild some of these more people-based value systems and value flows that can really not just sustain, but regenerate our local societies in deep relationship, hopefully, with the environment around us.
Thanks, Tony. I want to pass the mic over to B Parlin .eth and see what you've got to chime in with.
Yeah, thank you for the voice at first. My name is Baris Parlan, and all this conversation from theoretical to practical, it's amazing for me to listen. I serve as a tech consultant, and this is a question. I need some kind of a guidance, to be honest. I live in a North Cyprus. It is in Cyprus Island, but it is divided, and this north part is under embargo. It is political parties besides, but in reality, actually, the north side uses Turkish lira and south side uses euro in terms of currency. And due to recent, financial crisis and things like that in both Turkey and in the Middle East, we are getting a lot of, problematic things. Unfortunately, that this North Cyprus community is like 800,000 people, and usually people's, some small amount of them actually originated here that they don't have IBAN or international banking access or any other DID solutions. For example, identities doesn't recognize our identity cards as any country or something. So most of the people cannot even select North Cyprus as a location in the eBay or Google or somewhere else. So that's the general situation in here. And those communities, actually, many friends of mine that we grew up together for years, that we have been trying to build some bi-communal local production solution from producer to consumer kind of something. But some group of people have the challenges with distribution network and how to solve that one. And some people challenge with the tokenization part because we use Turkish lira, the other part uses euro, and it's really hard to keep a different value systems kind of stuff. It's really hard to establish this kind of stuff in here. And we already have land towers, for example. We already gathered our resources and lands together in a list in the COP Cyprus under a name, but we didn't take any support from anyone. Usually, they need lots of different connections. So in the end, I end up with this Regen Network stuff. I work in PrimeDAO as a fundamental analyst, so I end up in this refi hackathon, ratathon. I realized lots of projects and I dive into Regen. So I have been following around and decided to share this network with those friends that they are literally land stewards. Actually, they are local production people who needs distribution solution or the communication solution, something like that, and some kind of a solution for tokenization. So I wanted to just, am I in the right place? Is this something that we can keep in touch or contact, or is the most of the network I saw is usually South American based, I think. I'm not sure at all. So that's the situation I wanted to share. And thank you for all those valuable conversations at all. So that's
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'll speak briefly to that, and yeah, so I think at the moment, yes, absolutely, there could be. I could easily envision with the tools that are currently accessible and available, there could be an eco crediting system that your cooperative could design to place value in the way that you all would like. Some people in the community are using the eco credit module to express things like carbon credits, where there's an external market for carbon outcomes. Other people are using it to sort of express more intrinsic value that a community is agreeing upon and use it to create sort of an ecological, sort of a first generation ecological currency. It sounds to me like that would be the most useful. I just, sort of invoking examples of through history of kind of the role of complementary currency systems in situations like what you're describing. It sounds like that could be useful. I will say, we're mostly built and building to try to represent ecological value. So what you're really trying to do is create sort of more of a local mutual credit system. there's significantly, I think at some point we'll be getting to a more mature phase of that, but we're really more focused on sort of scientifically rigorous ecological crediting, which, as we've been discussing, or I mentioned a couple times, I think is kind of a foundation for currency systems. But if it's most useful for you to be thinking about the sort of the human exchange side, and you don't need to be linking it to ecological health at this moment, and you just need to be invoking a complementary currency system, I would encourage you to go check out resource.network. They have a tech stack around mutual credit. There's also non-blockchain solutions. There's an amazing mutual credit library, and you can spin up for free. I think it's just built in Drupal, maybe. So it's just, like if you have a trusted party that can just manage a, SQL database, there's complementary mutual credit currency systems that could be interesting and useful. And there's already a lot of people throughout Europe that are working. So there's a broad community. So those are a couple places where you might look for more kind of just the pure mutual credit side of things. And again, if you're wanting to really from day one be rooting it in ecological health and then building sort of a local currency system that's born out of that and starts from those assumptions, then yeah, I think Regen Network probably has some really fantastic tools for you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for information. Just wanted to clarify that it is fully the most of those local production people's guys that in my the age and whatever, they are more focused on organic production fully actually, and like I don't know their I know in Turkish names, but I don't know in English. But in terms of agriculture, it's most of the things like the organic production and the eco-aware peoples. But yeah, it generally sounds okay that with the lead I get, I think it will be definitely to talk more about those things. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We're edging up towards 12:30. I want to respect Tony and Martine's time. Ed, do you mind being brief in your inclusion here, so we can let everybody go on to the rest of their day?
Yes, I will. But I wanted to. Both what Martine and Tony did are great. Are working on some great stuff. But I wanted to bring to attention that in the United States now, leading regenerative farmers are working on a lot of these issues, working with scientists and researchers. Rick Haney is doing soil testing for living systems. In fact, there'll be a webinar, a podcast tonight, Zoom, with Rick Clark, who has Farm Green. He does a podcast every week, and Rick Haney and Lance Gunderson are both going to be on it. We have the Ecdysis Institute, which is doing the biggest inventory of farm ecosystems ever done, over 1,000 farms. And so that we have the data about what ecosystems contain. We're also looking at getting a deep dive in how ecosystems function, so that we really understand what are the key points that we can recognize within a functioning system to determine that it is functioning. Of course, then we have Dan Kitteridge and the Bionutrient Institute, which is doing a study on nutrient density by how we farm, and especially in living systems, which is going to change how we look at food value. And we're also, into Tony's stuff, we're looking very much at how we change mindsets for farmers, because the farmers are being mostly the consultants right now. So when they go to a conventional farmer, how do they get that mindset understanding into the people that he's serving, either in the public or with their sales, in their decentralizing of the food system? So we're really looking at how we get people to understand how natural systems work and why they're important. So I'll keep it brief and leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Ed. Yeah, really fantastic invitations for people to go tune in to the really great farmer-led work that's happening around regenerative agriculture and sort of the roots of that in this whole conversation. Great. Well, Tony, Martine, do you want to share any last thoughts before we wrap it up? I know this has been thought-provoking, Martine, and I certainly have a few things to sort of contemplate and weave back regarding the paper. Reflections.
Yeah, thank you. This has been a great space and forum, and a lot of these things are, I think we're all tapping into a common collective consciousness, to cite Tony, and picking up the need for these things. So it feels very timely, which is why, not just for the context of the weekend retreat that Tony's organizing on EcoCoins, I've been personally felt like pushed forward to put some of these ideas on paper, or thus as I'm listening, I'm also kind of writing things down literally on the Word document, and I look forward to co-creating it together, sort of a statement on the power, the potential designs, and the things to consider when trying to bring natural and living capital into our monetary system, and definitely hope to have a draft for everyone to look at and critique before the end of the year, but actually probably by November. In fact, we are probably organizing a nature-based currency panel at the at the COP27 this year with other central bankers there to discuss these ideas. So more than anything, I'm definitely looking forward to continuing the chat over the weekend, and thank everyone for chiming in.
Tony, any parting reflections?
Thank you very much for bringing me on here. I'm likewise really looking forward to this weekend. We've got some wonderful groups in the space, including yourselves and our friends at Planet Labs, the founder of Amazon Watch, Gregory, you kindly invited. So I'm really hopeful that we can both have some really engaged discussions around this and then write it up and take it out back to the community. You have nurtured an incredible community, Gregory, and I think that's what this is going to take. It's going to take us all interoperating and connecting through these kinds of gatherings to enable this collective experience, this set of collective feelings that I think needs to be a part of our collective awareness on that human level and on that consciousness level, so that we can collectively act. So thanks again, Gregory, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks to folks hopping up to share reflections and ask questions, and thanks to everybody for sticking around through the conversation. Just to sort of remind everybody, kind of in the new and good land, we always like to have these sort of deep dive conversations when we can on the Regenerati News Hour. We also, for those of you who weren't around at the beginning, we made a few announcements. Very excited that the Regen Marketplace is going to be live on Tuesday of next week. And the first vintages of eco credits, carbon in this case, are going to be live in the marketplace. That's the City Forest credit class, developed by the City Forest Registry system. There was a really cool little NPR feature on the City Forest partnership with Regen Network. It was pretty fun to be in the morning news hour. I think that happened last week. And if you want to sort of get acquainted with how everything's working, there's a new set of documentation at guides.regen.network. It's a couple tweets down in my tweet stream of this morning if you want to go check that out. Tony, Martine, thanks so much for kind of having a freewheeling and deep conversation about this emerging topic, which is really, I think, important. How to me, money is in some ways sort of the root protocol of human culture. It's both emergent from human culture, but also informs and transforms human culture. And reconnecting our design of money itself, not just the inclusion of natural or living capital as financial assets in the existing monetary system, but really getting to the root of how we transform how money works, how it's created, so that it creates a positive, mutualistic relationship between the human economy and the greater than human world. So that as we're, I sort of hold this image of regeneration as the exhaust of human existence. What needs to be true so that as we're going about our day to day and we're, as Richard was inviting us to think, sort of thriving and having, good lives as humans, the outcome into the ecosystems that we're embedded within is regeneration, is resilience, is increasing soil health and stable and maybe even increasing biodiversity and ecological health. I think that's the image that we're all working towards. And then there's this complex reality of systems change. How do we transform the system? So this conversation has really spanned the gamut. We have talked about the technological layers that are going to be necessary for us to be engaging with. We've talked about some of the social, political, legal layers that we need to be engaging with. And of course, the economic sort of root protocol of our monetary system and how we can start approaching that. And then maybe above all of that, just this concept of collective consciousness, this moment, the narrative, the story, how we're ritualizing a new approach to reimagining all of this. So I'm super grateful to have had this conversation on Regenerati News Hour, and again, really grateful for everybody chiming in and listening in. And I'll see some of you in person in a couple days, and see everybody else hopefully on the Regenerati News Hour next week. And we'll be a couple days post marketplace launch, which is pretty exciting. So it'll be a new era when we reconvene. So until next week, thanks everybody.
Thanks all.
Thank you, Gregory. Cheers.
See ya.
Thank you very much.